The Mafia boss saw the black maid comforting his autistic son and felt something he'd never felt. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. It was a quiet afternoon in the sprawling mansion of the Romano family. The mansion, with its marble floors and towering columns, stood like a fortress against the world. The silence was broken only by the faint rustling of the leaves outside, as a soft breeze swept through the windows. Inside, the atmosphere was far from peaceful. Dante Romano, the head of the Romano crime family, sat alone in his office, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished desk in front of him. He was a man who exuded power, control, and a certain cold indifference to the world around him. But today, something seemed different. His mind was elsewhere, clouded with the responsibilities of his empire and the ever-present danger that followed him wherever he went. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, his son, Marco, was struggling. The young boy, barely 6 years old, was autistic, and his world was a confusing blur of sounds and emotions that he could not express. His mother had passed away when he was just a baby, leaving Dante to raise him alone. Despite his wealth and power, Dante found himself ill-equipped to handle Marco's needs. He had tried everything, therapists, specialists, but nothing seemed to work. Marco's episodes were growing more frequent, and with each one, Dante's frustration grew. Today, like so many others, Marco was having one of those days. His cries echoed through the mansion, desperate and heartbreaking. The staff had tried to calm him, but they were powerless. That's when Sarah, the black maid who had worked in the Romano household for over a year, noticed the chaos. She had always kept her distance, doing her work quietly and without drawing attention to herself. But something about Marco's cries tugged at her heart. She had a younger brother with special needs, and she knew what it was like to feel helpless when a child was in distress. Without thinking, she walked toward Marco's room. She didn't ask for permission, and she didn't care about the rules. She simply knew she had to help. The moment she entered the room, the tension in the air shifted. Marco was sitting on the floor, his tiny hands pressed against his ears, rocking back and forth in distress. The sight of him was enough to break Sarah's heart, but she didn't hesitate. She sat down beside him, her voice gentle as she spoke to him in soothing tones. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now," she whispered, reaching out slowly. Marco didn't respond at first, his eyes wide with fear. But as Sarah began humming a soft lullaby, the room seemed to calm. Marco's body stopped shaking, and his breath became less ragged. The transformation was subtle but significant. For the first time in what felt like forever, the boy began to relax. He looked up at Sarah with wide, curious eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he seemed at peace. It was then that Dante entered the room. He had heard the cries, and his frustration had finally led him to search for his son. But what he saw when he opened the door shocked him. There was Sarah, the maid, sitting on the floor beside his son, her arms around him as she calmed him with nothing more than a simple lullaby. For a moment, Dante froze in the doorway. He had always viewed Sarah as just another member of the staff, someone who blended into the background of his life. But now, he saw her in a different light. There was something about the way she handled Marco, so effortlessly, so calmly, that made him question everything he thought he knew about her. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. Sarah looked up at him, surprised by his sudden appearance. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other. Dante's eyes were sharp, calculating, but there was something else in them now. A vulnerability, a crack in the armor he had spent years building. Sarah, on the other hand, was still shaken by the intimacy of the moment. She had never imagined that she would be caught in such a situation, especially not by someone as powerful as Dante Romano. But despite the unease she felt, she remained calm, not out of fear, but because she knew what Marco needed. She didn't speak, but her eyes spoke volumes. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Dante looked down at his son, still nestled against Sarah's side, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir within him. It wasn't just gratitude or relief. It was something deeper, something more profound. And in that moment, He realized he hadn't been the one to save his son today. It had been Sarah, the maid who had quietly entered his world and changed everything. I can't explain what happened next, but it changed everything. Dante stared at Sarah as she held Marco in her arms, the boy now calm and peaceful after the storm of his emotions. He had never seen his son in such a state of calm. It was as though the world had stopped moving for just a moment, and all that existed was Sarah and Marco, in a bond that Dante himself could never have imagined. Dante felt his heart beat harder in his chest, but not in the way he was used to. It wasn't fear or anger or the cold, calculated power he was accustomed to feeling. It was something else, something strange and unfamiliar. For the first time in his life, Dante felt vulnerable. He didn't know what to say or what to do. The cold, hard exterior he had so carefully crafted over the years seemed to melt away, and he felt as though he were standing there, exposed, in front of this woman who had come into his world so quietly and yet so profoundly. Sarah looked up at him, sensing the change in the air. She had always known that Dante was powerful, dangerous even, but she had never seen him like this, uncertain, almost lost. It was as though the walls he had built around himself had cracked, and she could see inside. Dante cleared his throat and took a step closer, his eyes never leaving his son, who was now sound asleep in Sarah's arms. "You've done something for him I haven't been able to do," Dante said, his voice low, almost like a confession. Sarah blinked, not sure if she had heard him right. "I didn't do anything special," she replied softly. "I just helped him find peace." "No," Dante said, shaking his head. "You've done more than that. You've given him something I couldn't." The words hung between them, thick with meaning, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. Sarah felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. She had only wanted to help, but now she found herself in a position she never expected. She was just a maid, an outsider in this world of wealth and power. And yet, somehow, she had become a part of it. "You've done more for him than any therapist, any specialist," Dante continued, his tone softer now. "He trusts you." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his eyes. She had always known Dante to be a man of control, a man who never showed weakness. But now, in this moment, he was asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. "I'm just here to help," she said quietly, not wanting to make things more complicated than they already were. Dante's gaze softened, and he took another step closer. "I need someone who can help him like you did today. Someone who understands him." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was asking. It was more than just a job. It was an offer to become a part of his world, a world she had never imagined being a part of. "You want me to stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante nodded. "I can't do this alone anymore," he said, his voice full of quiet desperation. "I need you." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Sarah looked down at Marco, sleeping soundly in her arms, and felt her heart swell. This was more than just a job. This was a chance to make a difference in someone's life. Maybe it was the chance she had been waiting for. "I'll stay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll help him." Dante's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something like hope stir inside him. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. As Sarah stood there, holding Marco, she couldn't help but wonder what had just happened. Had she really agreed to stay? To work for the most powerful man in the city? It felt surreal, like a dream she didn't quite understand. But one thing was certain, her life was about to change. And it was a change she wasn't sure she was ready for. "I'm not sure what I expected when I walked into the Romano mansion that morning, but it wasn't this. The decision to stay had felt like a dream, one I hadn't fully grasped yet. Every step I took further into the mansion seemed to pull me deeper into a world I didn't belong in. But with Marco, it was different. He needed me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something truly important." Dante's mansion was quiet in the mornings, the kind of silence that makes everything feel heavier. The grand hallways were lined with dark wood and marble, statues and paintings that screamed old money and old power. As I walked past them, I felt more out of place than ever. But when I reached Marco's room, everything changed. The moment I opened the door, the air seemed to shift. Marco was sitting by the window, his back to me, staring out at the garden. His small body was stiff, the way it often was when he was overwhelmed. I moved quietly toward him, not wanting to startle him. but knowing he needed something I could give him. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, kneeling down beside him. He didn't respond, but I could see his little hands tremble, his fingers twitching nervously. I gently placed my hand on his, feeling the tension in his body. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe." Marco turned his head slowly, his wide eyes meeting mine. For a moment, there was no sound in the room. I held his gaze, waiting for a sign, any sign that he was hearing me. Then, just as I was about to speak again, his lips parted. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice small and fragile. My heart clenched. I had known about his mother, of course. Dante had never spoken much about her, but I could tell how deeply her absence had affected both of them. Marco had been too young to remember her, but somehow, he still sensed the loss. "No, buddy," I said gently, my voice soothing. "I'm not your mom, but I'm here to take care of you. I promise." For a moment, there was no response. Then Marco's small hand squeezed mine, just enough to let me know he understood. I smiled softly, brushing my fingers through his hair. "How about we go to the garden today? I think you'd like it out there. It's peaceful, just like you." Marco's face softened, and he nodded, his body relaxing a little. It was the first time since I'd arrived that I felt like I was actually making a difference. We spent the rest of the morning in the garden, Marco's favorite place. It was quiet there, filled with flowers and the gentle hum of nature. He seemed at ease, something I hadn't seen in a while. But it was when we sat by the fountain that I saw the change in Dante. He appeared in the doorway of the garden. His usual stern expression softened as he looked at his son. For a moment, I thought he might just walk away, but instead, he stepped forward, closer to us. "How's he doing?" Dante asked quietly, his voice low, as though he didn't want to disturb the moment. I looked up at him, unsure of how to respond. I didn't want to overstep, but I also wanted to be honest. "He's doing better," I said softly. "He just needed some time, some space. He's been through a lot." Dante's eyes followed Marco's every move as the boy gently splashed his hands in the fountain. There was a distant look in his eyes, as though he were seeing his son for the first time in a long while. "You're doing good with him," Dante said quietly, his gaze still focused on Marco. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Dante took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving his son. "I never knew how to handle this part of him," Dante admitted, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I wasn't sure how to respond, but I could feel the weight of his words. Dante wasn't the kind of man who admitted weakness, let alone vulnerability. But in that moment, I saw the cracks in his armor, and I realized just how much he cared for Marco. It was a side of him I hadn't expected to see, and it shook me more than I cared to admit. He turned his gaze back to me, his expression shifting. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice steady but soft. It wasn't a compliment or a thank you. It was something deeper, something more personal. "We need you." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just gave him a small nod. I could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on my shoulders, but I also knew I couldn't back away now. Marco needed me, and maybe, just maybe, I could make a difference in his life. And in Dante's, too. The morning passed in quiet, and as we headed back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Not just in Marco, but in all of us. Dante was no longer the cold, distant Mafia boss I had once thought him to be. There was something softer underneath, something human. And as I walked beside him, with Marco between us, I couldn't help but wonder what this would all mean for our future. What would it mean for me, for them, and for this strange bond that was beginning to form? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. My life was no longer just about being a maid. It was about being part of something bigger, something that could change everything. I didn't expect the next few days to unfold the way they did. It was as if, with each passing hour, the invisible lines between us, me, the maid, and Dante, the Mafia boss, were slowly beginning to blur. The first few days had been relatively quiet. I kept to my routine, spending most of my time with Marco. Dante was still present in the house, but he seemed different somehow. There was a subtle shift in the way he looked at me, as if he were seeing me for the first time. But there was still a wall between us, a kind of unspoken understanding that we were from two completely different worlds. However, that wall seemed to be eroding little by little. One evening, Dante invited me to dinner in the formal dining room. It was unexpected, considering that I had always eaten in the staff quarters, far away from the family's gatherings. When the invitation came, I hesitated. A dinner with him? In the same room as the rest of his family? It felt wrong, like stepping into a world I didn't belong in. But I knew I couldn't refuse. It wasn't a simple invitation, it was a request, and I understood the weight of it. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple but respectful. When I arrived at the dining table, Dante was already there, seated at the head of the table. His usual cold demeanor was absent, replaced with a quiet warmth I hadn't expected. The rest of the family was there too, his brother, a few cousins, and some of their closest associates. They all eyed me as I entered, their expressions hard to read. It was clear that my presence was a point of curiosity for them. But it was Dante who broke the silence, nodding toward the seat next to him. "Sit," he said simply, his voice calm, but with a commanding undertone. I sat down, feeling every pair of eyes on me. The meal began with the usual formalities, polite conversation, and the clinking of silverware against fine china. But I noticed something odd. Whenever I looked at Dante, he seemed to be watching me, not in a cold, calculating way, but with something that looked almost like care. It was disorienting. Throughout the meal, the conversation was mostly about business. I had heard bits and pieces of these discussions before, but sitting at the table now, it felt different. The mafia, the power plays, the manipulation, it was all laid out in the open. It was all too easy to see the lengths Dante would go to protect his empire. But amidst the business talk, there was an occasional moment where our eyes would meet. And in those moments, the world seemed to stop. It was as if everything around us faded away. I had never seen him like this, so vulnerable. It was as though he was allowing himself to be something other than the powerful figure everyone expected him to be. The night went on, and I kept my distance, but Dante seemed more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. It wasn't long before the meal ended, and the guests began to leave. But Dante stayed behind, lingering by the fireplace with a glass of whiskey in his hand. I stood up to leave, but he called out to me, his voice quieter now. "Stay for a moment," he said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. I hesitated, but something in his voice made me stay. I turned toward him, my heart racing. There was something different in the air, something shifting between us that I couldn't quite place. "You did well with Marco," Dante said, his eyes still fixed on me. "He's calm now, for the first time in a long time." I smiled, but the gesture felt small in comparison to the weight of his words. "He just needed someone to listen," I said quietly. Dante nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know what to do with him," he admitted. "I've tried everything, but nothing works. You're the first one to make a difference." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I had always known that he loved his son, but I had never realized how deeply the loss of his wife had affected him. It was as if the pain had built up over time, and Marco's struggles had become a constant reminder of everything Dante had lost. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I just stood there, letting the silence between us fill the space. Finally, Dante spoke again. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," he said, his voice low and almost raw. "I don't usually let people in, but with you, it feels different." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Was this the same man who had once been so distant, so cold? The man who ruled his world with an iron fist? "You've made a difference in our lives," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. And I can't ignore that. There was a heaviness in his words, an unspoken promise that lingered between us. I felt the weight of it, the responsibility that came with being part of his world, part of his family. And in that moment, I realized that everything was changing. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I wasn't just someone who took care of Marco. I was becoming a part of something much bigger than myself. And I had no idea where it would take me. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to who I was before. And neither could Dante. I hadn't realized how much had changed until that morning. It had been a week since Dante had invited me to dinner, a week since everything between us had shifted in a way I couldn't explain. I had spent my days with Marco, getting to know him better, learning his rhythms, understanding the ways in which he communicated, even if words didn't always come easily to him. His progress was slow, but I could see it. His small steps toward understanding the world around him were a testament to the patience we were both learning to have. Dante's presence, though, was harder to decipher. He had become more involved with Marco, spending time with him in ways I hadn't seen before. But with me, he remained distant, still a world away, even though the barriers seemed to have thinned. It was as if he was trying to find the balance between being the mafia boss he had always been and being the father his son needed. But there were still moments when that wall cracked. Like when he looked at me across the room, his gaze softer than it had ever been. Or when he found me with Marco, calming him during one of his episodes, and didn't say anything, just watched quietly. That silence, though, was different now. It wasn't cold, it wasn't distant. It felt like acceptance. The tension had eased between us, but it had been replaced by something else, something heavier. Something that made me question how far I was willing to go in this new life I had found myself in. It was early one morning when Dante approached me again. I was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Marco. The sound of the soft breeze outside mixed with the clinking of the dishes, and for a moment, I thought the world had stopped. I turned around to find Dante standing in the doorway, watching me. There was something in his eyes, a hint of something deeper than I had seen before. "How's he doing?" he asked, his voice steady. But there was an underlying concern there that I hadn't heard before. "He's good," I replied, looking back down at Marco's plate. "He's been a little more calm lately, but I think he's still adjusting. It's going to take time." Dante stepped into the room, his presence filling the space in a way that was impossible to ignore. "He's not the only one adjusting," he said, his voice softer now. "I've been thinking a lot about this. About you. About what you've done for him. For us." I looked up at him, unsure of what he meant. The weight of his words hung in the air, filling the room. "With something new. What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Dante hesitated for a moment, and then, as if making a decision, he walked closer to me. "You've changed everything for him, for me," he said quietly. "I didn't know how to be a father to him. I thought I could fix everything with money and power. But you." He stopped himself, his jaw tightening. "You've shown me there's more to this than that. You've shown me that there's more to being a father than just being the provider." He looked down at his hands for a moment, the weight of his words lingering between us. "I don't know how to thank you for that." I was taken aback. Dante, the man who ran an empire, the man who had everything at his disposal, was standing in front of me, expressing gratitude in a way I had never imagined. It was unexpected, vulnerable, and it left me speechless. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had always known Dante as the Mafia boss, the man who took control of every situation, who commanded respect from everyone around him. But now, I saw him as a father, struggling with the same fears and doubts every parent faces. He wasn't just the man who ran an empire. He was a man who wanted to be a better father to his son. And in that moment, I realized that I was part of that change. I was part of his transformation, even if I hadn't fully understood it yet. "You don't need to thank me," I finally said, my voice soft. "I'm just doing what feels right. Marco deserves to have someone who understands him. He deserves to have someone who cares. And so do you." Dante's eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. It was just the two of us, in that moment, connecting in a way that was both simple and profound. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said quietly, his voice filled with an emotion I hadn't heard from him before. "But I know one thing. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." The words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain, but for some reason, they felt real. They felt like a promise. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of the unknown, of what might come next, because I knew that whatever it was, we would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, that was all I needed to know. I had never imagined how much my life would change after that night. The days that followed were a whirlwind of new responsibilities and growing connections, but I never expected how quickly things would shift. Dante had made his feelings clear, but I still wasn't sure where I stood in his world. I knew he had opened up to me in a way that was rare for him, and I appreciated it more than I could say. But I also felt the weight of his words. "I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Those words echoed in my mind as I spent the following days with Marco, trying to help him navigate his world, just as I was trying to figure out how I fit into this strange new family dynamic. Marco was doing better, and that was the most important thing. His laughter, though soft and sometimes fleeting, had become more frequent. I found myself spending more time with him, and the bond between us was growing stronger with each passing day. But it wasn't just Marco. I had started noticing things about Dante that I hadn't before. He wasn't just the powerful Mafia boss I had once seen. He was a father, a man who had buried so much pain for so long. And yet, when it came to Marco, he was willing to learn, to grow, and to change. It was difficult to reconcile the two sides of him. The ruthless man who ran an empire, and the vulnerable father who simply wanted his son to be happy. Dante was still trying to balance both worlds. I could see it in the way he interacted with Marco. He was trying, and that was more than I had ever expected from him. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the living room with Marco, Dante walked in. His usual commanding presence filled the room, but there was something different about him. His shoulders were a little slouched, his usual stern expression softer than usual. "How's he doing today?" Dante asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I looked up at him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "He's good," I replied. "He had a good day. We've been spending time outside, just letting him play and get comfortable." Dante nodded, walking over to where Marco was sitting on the floor, playing with his toy cars. He crouched down beside him, watching him with a kind of intensity one hadn't seen before. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped, like there was no mafia, no business, no empire, just a father and his son. I didn't know what to say, so I remained quiet, watching the scene unfold. Then, to my surprise, Dante spoke again. "You've really helped him, you know that?" he said, his voice still soft. I didn't know what to do, but you've made a difference. For him, for me." My heart skipped a beat. I had heard Dante speak many times, but this was different. This wasn't the cold, calculating man I had known. This was Dante, the father, expressing something he didn't often let himself feel. "I just want him to be happy," I said, my voice steady, though my emotions were anything but. "He deserves a chance to be like any other child." Dante looked at me, and for a moment, there was a depth in his eyes that made me feel like he was seeing me for the first time. It was as if the walls between us had fallen completely. I couldn't tell if it was the change in him or the way he was looking at me now, but something shifted. "You're more than just his maid," Dante said, his words catching me off guard. "I know I've treated you like that, like you're just here to do your job, but you've done more than that. You've cared for him, and you've cared for me too." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was more than I had ever expected from him. "You're part of this family now," he continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "You've shown me what it means to be more than just a provider. I can't keep you in the background anymore." His words were heavy, carrying a promise I wasn't sure I was ready for. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I wasn't just someone who took care of Marco. I was becoming something else. A part of his world. A part of his life. Dante stood up and walked toward the window, his hands in his pockets, his back turned to me. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he said quietly. "About Marco needing someone who understands him. But I think I need that too. I've been so focused on control, on power, that I've forgotten what it means to just be a father. I've forgotten how to be human." The words hung in the air between us, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the start of something new, something I hadn't anticipated. Dante, a man who had built his entire life on power, was now grappling with the simple, raw emotions of being a father. And somehow, I had become part of that. As the silence stretched on, I realized that I wasn't just helping Marco anymore. I was helping Dante too, and that was more than I could have ever expected. He turned back to face me, his eyes steady now, the vulnerability still there, but mixed with something else, determination. "I want you to stay," he said, his voice firm but soft. "I want you to help us." "Help me." I wasn't sure what to say, but I nodded. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew I couldn't walk away now. Something had changed, something deep within both of us. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I never imagined how much things could change in such a short amount of time. After that conversation with Dante, the air around us shifted. There was still an undeniable tension, but it wasn't the same as before. The walls that had once been so high between us were now cracked, though not entirely gone. But what had truly surprised me was how quickly things had evolved with Marco. Every day, I saw the small progress he made, the moments where he smiled, or when he spoke to me in that soft, hesitant voice. It was those little moments that made everything feel worthwhile. I didn't know how long it would take for Marco to fully open up, but I knew I was part of his journey now, and that was more than enough. The house had taken on a new energy. There were more quiet dinners, more time spent together as a family, even though we still weren't quite a family in the traditional sense. But Dante had made an effort. He spent more time with Marco, asking questions, playing with him, and trying to connect in ways that I had never seen before. There was still a coldness to him, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it used to be. He was letting me in, and I could tell that he was slowly letting Marco in as well. But something changed one night. It was after dinner, and Dante had asked me to join him in his study. I wasn't sure what to expect. My heart raced as I walked through the grand hallway, the weight of his request hanging in the air. When I entered the room, Dante was sitting at his desk, looking at papers. He glanced up when I walked in, his expression unreadable, but there was a softness there. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low, but not distant. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the direction of my life, about the choices I've made, and about you." I didn't know what to say. His words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I stood there, unsure of how to respond. "You've been here for a while now," Dante continued, his voice steady. "And I've seen how much you've changed things around here. Not just with Marco, but with me too." I felt a lump form in my throat. What was he trying to say? Was he thanking me? Or was this a goodbye? I wasn't sure. Dante leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been a father to Marco in my own way," he said, his voice firm but vulnerable. "But I've always kept a part of myself locked away. And I've realized that I can't do that anymore. Not with him. And not with you." My heart was pounding. He was admitting something I hadn't expected, vulnerability. Dante was acknowledging that he needed me. Not just for Marco, but for himself. "I'm asking you to stay," he said quietly. "Not just because of Marco, but because I need you in my life." His words hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so much time trying to figure out where I fit into this world, but now it seemed like I was being asked to become a permanent part of it. I swallowed hard, trying to process what he had just said. I had never imagined being in this position, being a part of something so much bigger than I had ever dreamed of. "I'm not asking you to become something you're not," Dante continued, his voice softening. "I know who you are, and I know what you've done for me and Marco. I don't want to keep you at arm's length anymore. I want you to be here, with us." His words struck a chord deep within me. I had always been the one on the outside, looking in. But now, Dante was offering me something different. A chance to be part of something more than just a maid, more than just a caregiver. He was offering me a chance to be a part of his life, and a part of Marco's future. "You've given me something I didn't even know I needed," he said, his eyes soft with emotion. "And I can't ignore that anymore." I stood there, frozen for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye, and I was being asked to step into a new role, one I hadn't fully anticipated. But as I looked at Dante, I realized that he was right. This was my chance to be a part of something real, something that mattered. And as I looked at Marco, sleeping soundly in the corner of the room, I knew that I couldn't turn back now. "I'll stay," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I'll stay for both of you." Dante nodded, his face softening into something close to relief. "Thank you," he said quietly. And in that moment, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready to face it, together with them. I didn't expect to feel the shift so suddenly, but the change in Dante was unmistakable. After that night when he asked me to stay, to truly be part of his life, things between us began to evolve in ways I couldn't have predicted. We were still adjusting, still learning what it meant to share this space, to share Marco, but every day felt like a new chapter. Dante's role in Marco's life had already been shifting, but I saw it most clearly in the small moments. The times he would sit with Marco, his usually cold and calculating demeanor softened by something gentler when he looked at his son. The moments when Dante would quietly ask how Marco was doing, checking in, and looking for ways to connect. I saw him more than I had in the past. I saw the man behind the Mafia boss, and he wasn't as invincible as I had once thought. But even with all the change, there were still walls between us, walls I wasn't sure I would ever be able to break down. I knew Dante was trying. He was trying with Marco, with me, with everything. But there was still so much of his past that he kept buried, so much he hadn't shared, and I could tell it was still holding him back. One evening, as the sun was setting and the mansion was quieter than usual, Dante and I found ourselves alone in the library. He was sitting at the large desk, papers scattered around him, but he wasn't really looking at them. His eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward Marco, who was outside playing in the garden. I watched him for a moment, unsure of what to say, but then he spoke. "I never realized how much I was missing," Dante said, his voice quieter than usual. "In everything. In my work, in my life, in Marco. I glanced at him, not sure where this conversation was going, but I felt the weight of his words. What do you mean? I asked, sitting down across from him. I always thought I could fix everything with power. With control. Dante continued, his eyes still distant. But you, he paused for a moment, his gaze finally meeting mine. You've shown me that it's not enough. You've shown me that I need to be more. For him. For you. His words hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. There was a vulnerability in his voice that I hadn't heard before, a rawness that was so unlike the man I had first met. You've made me realize that I can't keep pretending, he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. I've spent so many years hiding behind this mask, behind this empire, that I forgot what it was like to really live, to really feel. I could feel the shift in the air. Dante was opening up in a way that was both surprising and unsettling. It wasn't the Mafia boss I had come to know, the man who ruled his world with iron-fisted control. It was a different side of him, a side that wanted more than just power, a side that wanted connection, love, and understanding. I wasn't sure how to react to it. I had always kept my distance from him, knowing that our worlds were too different to ever truly collide. But in this moment, I felt that distance close in. I know I haven't been the best father, Dante said, his voice quieter now. I've been trying to fix everything, but I've been doing it the wrong way. I've been doing it for the wrong reasons. I stayed silent, unsure of how to comfort him, or if I even should. It was clear that he was grappling with something deep inside himself. I've been distant from Marco, he continued, his tone filled with regret. I've been distant from everything that truly matters. And it's only now that I realize what I've been missing. What we've both been missing. There was a long silence between us. I could feel the weight of his words sinking in, and I knew that this was a turning point. It wasn't just about Marco anymore. It wasn't just about me. It was about Dante and his struggle to break free from the walls he had built around himself for so long. I looked at him, seeing the man behind the mask. The father who loved his son, even if he hadn't always known how to show it. The man who was trying to change, trying to be better. You're not alone in this, I said softly. We're all here. Marco and I. We're in this together. Dante looked at me, his eyes softening. Thank you, he said quietly. His voice was full of emotion, and for the first time, I saw a side of him that was completely vulnerable. He wasn't the Mafia boss in that moment. He was just a man, asking for help. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just here to help Marco. I was here to help Dante too. I wasn't sure where this would go, or how much further we would go down this road together. But in that moment, I knew that something had changed. Something real. And it was only the beginning. I never could have predicted how much would change after that night. Dante's words, his confession of vulnerability, stayed with me in the days that followed. The shift between us was subtle, but it was undeniable. What started as an understanding of our shared responsibilities toward Marco was slowly transforming into something deeper, something that neither of us knew how to name. But I could feel it. The air between us felt heavier with every passing day, yet it wasn't suffocating. It was the weight of something more real than I had ever expected. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet moments and long talks. I spent most of my time with Marco, helping him settle into a more consistent routine. He was adjusting, slowly but surely. But Dante, he was still a mystery. The man who ran an empire, whose presence alone could freeze a room, was still a father trying to learn what it meant to be there for his son. There were moments when I saw him trying, when I saw the tenderness that had been buried deep inside him for so long. It was in the way he looked at Marco, the way he tried to engage with him, even when Marco wouldn't respond. I could see Dante's frustration, but I could also see his determination. And then, there were the moments when I saw the man he was outside of his role as a father, when the shadows of his empire seemed to loom over us, threatening to pull him back into the darkness. One evening, as I sat with Marco in the garden, Dante approached us. His footsteps were quiet, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether he should be there. But when he reached us, he simply stood there for a moment, watching us. Marco had his back turned, engrossed in his toy cars, but I could feel Dante's eyes on us. He's doing better, I said, breaking the silence. Dante's gaze softened as he looked down at his son. I know, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I've seen it. I can tell. He paused, taking in the scene before him. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of pride and uncertainty. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be the father he needs. I've been trying, but it feels like I'm always one step behind. I looked at him, unsure of what to say. Dante, the Mafia boss, was admitting something I had never thought I would hear. The power and control he had always wielded were gone, replaced by the raw, honest emotion of a father trying to do the best for his son. You're doing better than you think, I said softly. You're trying, and that's more than a lot of people would do. Dante looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the shift in his expression. The walls were still there, but they were beginning to crumble, bit by bit. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. You've done more for him than I ever could. More for me, too. I never realized how much I needed help, how much I needed you. His words took me by surprise. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded. You're not alone in this, I said, my voice steady. We're all in this together. Dante's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, and I could feel the weight of his unspoken thoughts. There was so much he hadn't shared, so much he still kept hidden behind that stoic mask. But in this moment, I saw him as he truly was, vulnerable, struggling, but willing to learn. He looked away, his eyes returning to Marco. I just don't know if I can ever be what he needs, Dante said, his voice thick with frustration. I'm not sure I can be the father he deserves. I stood up, walking toward him slowly, unsure of what to say, but knowing I had to say something. It's not about being perfect, I said softly. It's about being here. Showing up. You're doing that. And that matters more than you think. Dante turned to look at me then, his eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. He nodded slowly, taking in my words. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. You've made me see things differently. You've made me realize that there's more to life than just running this business, than just controlling everything. His words felt heavy, but in a good way. It was as if he had unlocked something inside himself, something he had been keeping buried for far too long. I'm still learning, Dante continued, and I don't have all the answers. But I'm trying. I want to be better. For Marco. And for you. My heart raced at his words, and I felt a warmth spread through me. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected him to open up like this, to show me the man behind the boss. But here he was, vulnerable, seeking something more than power. He was seeking connection. I didn't know where this would lead, or what the future held for us, but in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Dante wasn't the same man I had met weeks ago. He was changing, and so was I. I never imagined that things would come to this. After the conversation with Dante, I thought the tension between us would only grow, that the walls we had been building would remain impenetrable. But as time passed, I found myself drawn deeper into his world, and for the first time, I wasn't sure whether I was being pulled in by his power or something else, something more human. I had been with Marco so much, watching him grow and learn, and I could see the change in him. But there was also a change in Dante. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. He had always been a man of action, of control, but now I saw him trying to be a father, trying to connect with his son, and perhaps even with me. And yet, despite the progress, I could still feel the weight of his past pulling at him, dragging him back to the life he had once known. There were moments when the old Dante would return, the cold, calculating Mafia boss, a man who demanded loyalty and control. But then there were the moments when that facade would slip, and I would see the father, the man who was struggling to do the right thing. It was both comforting and terrifying to witness. I found myself wondering how long it would take before the man he once was would fully resurface, and what that would mean for Marco, for me, for us. One night, as I stood by the window, looking out at the city below, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Dante. His presence was unmistakable, the way he moved through the room, so sure of himself. But tonight, there was something different. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there, waiting. I knew he was thinking, processing something. He was never one to open up easily, and yet here we were, the distance between us narrowing in ways neither of us could fully understand. I've been thinking about you, Dante said finally, his voice softer than usual. The words were unexpected, and I felt my heart skip a beat. About how much you've changed things, he continued. For Marco. For me. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced. but I kept my gaze fixed on the city lights outside, trying to compose myself. I'm not the same person I was before, Dante said, almost as if he was confessing something. I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've hurt people. But with Marco, I feel like there's a chance for something different. I turned to face him, my breath catching in my throat. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that I had never seen before. It was as if he was finally seeing what he had been too afraid to acknowledge for so long. I don't know what this is, he said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. I don't know where it's going, but I know I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you. His words hung in the air between us, thick with meaning. I felt something stir within me, something that had been buried under layers of doubt and fear. I had never allowed myself to get too close to Dante, never allowed myself to believe that there could be something more between us. But in this moment, in this room, I saw him differently. I saw him as more than just the Mafia boss. I saw him as a man who was willing to change, who was fighting to be something better, not just for himself, but for his son. I had never imagined that I could be part of that. But here I was, standing before him, unsure of what the future held. I don't want to go back to what I was, Dante said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to go back to being the man I was before you came into our lives. I want to be better. For Marco. For you. His words were like a promise, and they sent a wave of warmth through me. I didn't know what it all meant, but in that moment, I felt like we were standing on the edge of something new. Something we had both been waiting for, even if we hadn't known it until now. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm, feeling the strength of his presence, the depth of his emotions. We don't have to have it all figured out, I said softly. We just have to take it one step at a time. Together. Dante's gaze softened, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes, something that was more than just determination. It was hope. For the first time, I could see that he was willing to change, not just for Marco, but for us. And that meant everything. Together, Dante repeated, his voice low and steady. I can do that. And in that moment, I knew we were both ready to face whatever came next. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other. And that was enough. I never thought I would get this far. Things had changed between Dante and me, and it felt like we were slowly building something real, something grounded in understanding and change. But just as I thought things were starting to settle, the world around us shifted again. It happened one evening, just after dinner. Marco had gone to bed, and Dante and I were sitting in the study, a quiet tension hanging in the air. It had been one of those rare moments when we didn't talk about Marco, didn't talk about the future. We just sat together, our thoughts heavy in the silence. I could feel the distance between us, the unsaid words lingering between us like a weight neither of us could lift. It was Dante who finally broke the silence. I've been thinking, he said, his voice soft, but serious. About everything. About how far we've come, about what this is. I looked at him, unsure of where this conversation was heading. Dante was a man of few words, especially when it came to matters of the heart, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I don't know how to say this, he continued, his hands resting on the table in front of him. But I can't keep pretending like I've got everything under control. I've spent my life pretending, controlling everything around me, but I've never been able to control this. You. Us. His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't like the usual way he spoke. There was no calculated power behind it, no force. Just truth. And I felt it. I've never allowed anyone to get close. Not like this. Not to me, not to Marco. But you. You've become part of something I didn't even know I needed. I don't know what you want from this. I don't know what I can give you, but I need you to know something. I leaned in slightly, trying to understand where this was going. What do you need me to know? I asked, my voice quiet, almost afraid of the answer. Dante paused, taking a deep breath as if he was trying to find the right words. His gaze was steady, intense, like he was searching for something in my eyes. I can't promise that things will be easy, he said, his voice low, but I can promise that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. For Marco, for you, and for me. I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I didn't know what to say, what to do with the truth he had just laid out in front of me. I had never expected Dante, of all people, to be the one to break down the walls, to admit his weaknesses, his flaws. He was the man who built an empire, who commanded fear and respect from everyone around him. But now, I saw him as a man, flawed, struggling, but doing the best he could. I don't want to be the man I was, Dante continued, his voice trembling slightly. I don't want to be the man who hides behind his power, who ignores what's right in front of him. I don't want to lose what I found here. With you. With Marco. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know if I even had the words. For so long, I had kept myself at a distance, unsure of where I stood, unsure of what I wanted. But this was different. There was no playing it safe anymore. No hiding behind the walls we had built. I reached out, placing my hand on his. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, the weight of the world outside the room. But for once, the room itself felt like it could hold everything. I'm here, I said softly, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out. Together. Dante's expression softened, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or hope. It was the first time I had seen that in him, and it made me realize how much I had grown to care about him. Together, he repeated, his voice low, almost like a promise. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, we had already crossed a line we could never go back from. The future wasn't certain, but for the first time, I felt like we had a chance to create something new, something better. And I was ready for it. I didn't know how everything would play out, but I knew we would face it together. Marco, Dante, and I, whatever the future held, we were going to take it on, step by step, without fear. I woke up the next morning with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. Dante and I had said things the night before that. For once, we're honest. There was no power struggle between us, no walls to climb over. We were just two people trying to navigate something neither of us fully understood, but we were willing to try. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I found myself thinking about Marco. He had come so far in such a short amount of time, and every day, I saw him opening up more. It was incredible to witness. The little boy who had once been overwhelmed by the world around him was starting to find his place in it. I had spent most of my time with him, learning the small things that made him comfortable, the things that made him feel safe. There were still difficult moments, of course. The struggles hadn't disappeared, but there was a quiet progress in his daily life that I hadn't seen before. He was learning to trust, and more importantly, he was learning that there were people around him who cared. Dante, though, was still a work in progress. He had made so much progress in a short time, but the scars of his past were deep. They didn't just vanish. Every now and then, I saw flashes of the old Dante, the cold, distant Mafia boss, the man who hid behind his wealth and power. But then, just as quickly, that mask would slip away, and I would see the father who was doing his best. I didn't know if he could ever fully let go of the persona he had spent so many years building, but I could see that he was trying. And that, in itself, was enough for now. That afternoon, after Marco had settled down for a nap, Dante and I found ourselves alone in the living room. I could feel the familiar tension, but it wasn't the same as before. It felt different now, like we were both on the edge of something important, something that would change everything. I've been thinking, Dante said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. About everything we've talked about what you said last night. I turned to look at him, unsure of where this conversation was going. He was still the man who had spent his life controlling every situation, but now there was a vulnerability in him I hadn't expected. You know, Dante continued, his gaze meeting mine. I've spent so much time trying to protect Marco, trying to protect myself, that I never realized how much I was pushing everyone away. Especially you. The words caught me off guard. Dante was never one to admit weakness, but here he was, doing just that. I know I'm not perfect, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. And I've been afraid that if I let anyone in, I'd lose everything. But with you, I don't feel like I'm losing anything. I feel like I'm gaining something. I could feel my heart beat faster. What he was saying was unexpected, but it also felt like a turning point. It was as if we were standing at the edge of something new, something that had the potential to change everything for both of us. I'm not asking for everything, he said, his voice softer now. I'm not asking for promises, but I want you to know that I want you in my life. I want Marco to have a chance at a real family, something more than just the image I've built. And I want you to be part of that, if you're willing. His words hung in the air, and I realized that for the first time, I wasn't just his employee. I wasn't just a maid. I was something more, something real. I wasn't sure what the future held or where this would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything we had been through. Not after the connection we had built, no matter how complicated it was. I'm willing, I said, my voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding through me. I'm willing to see where this goes. Together. Dante nodded slowly, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the calculated smile of the Mafia boss, the one that made everyone else nervous. This was different. It was a smile of hope, of possibility. Good, he said quietly, because I think we're just getting started. And in that moment, I realized that we were. We were just beginning to build something real, something neither of us had expected. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it felt like we were finally ready to face it, together. I couldn't believe how far we had come. The last few months had been a whirlwind of change, and I had never expected any of it. Dante and I, two people from entirely different worlds, had somehow found a way to make it work. The walls between us that had once seemed impenetrable were now nothing more than memories of a past neither of us wanted to return to. I had become a part of his world, and Marco, his son, had become a part of mine. Our connection was no longer defined by just our roles. It wasn't just about me being his maid, or him being the Mafia boss. It was about something deeper. We were a family, not in the traditional sense, but we had built something strong, something real. And that's all that mattered. Things weren't perfect, of course. There were still moments of tension, moments when Dante's past would resurface, pulling him back to the man he had once been. But those moments were fewer and farther between. He was trying, and that was enough. I had seen it in the way he looked at Marco, in the way he treated me. He was no longer hiding behind the power and control he had spent years building. He was allowing himself to be vulnerable, to be a father. And I could see the change in Marco too. His laughter was more frequent now. His smiles were brighter. He was growing into a child who felt safe, who felt loved. And I had a part in that. I had never imagined that I would be the one to help Marco, but here we were. I had become not just a caretaker, but someone who had helped him find his way, helped him find peace in a world that had often been too overwhelming. I didn't know where this road would lead us, but I knew I couldn't walk away. Neither of us could. One evening, after Marco had gone to bed, Dante and I sat in the living room, a comfortable silence between us. It wasn't awkward or strained, it was just peaceful. Dante looked over at me, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking, he said, his voice breaking the quiet. About everything. About how much we've changed. About how much I've changed. I turned to face him, my heart skipping a beat. I could hear the sincerity in his voice. What do you mean? I asked, my voice soft. Dante took a deep breath, looking down at his hands for a moment before meeting my gaze. I've spent my whole life building this empire, creating a world around me where I was always in control, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But none of that mattered when it came to Marco. None of it mattered when it came to us. I thought I could protect everyone with power, but I was wrong. He paused, his eyes searching mine. I know I haven't always been the father Marco needs. I know I've made mistakes. But I'm here now. I'm trying. And I can't do it without you. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always known that Dante had been struggling, but hearing him say it aloud, hearing the vulnerability in his voice, made me realize just how far he had come. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he continued, his voice quiet. I'm asking for a chance to be the man I should have been all along, and to have you and Marco in my life. I could feel my heart racing. This wasn't just about Marco anymore. This was about us, about the future we could have together. I'm not perfect, he said, almost as if he were speaking to himself as much as to me. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I reached out, placing my hand gently on his. It felt like a promise. We're here, I said softly, and we're not going anywhere either. For the first time in a long time, I saw hope in Dante's eyes. It wasn't the cold, calculated look I had come to know. It was a look that said he was ready to change, ready to let go of the past, and build something better. For himself, for Marco, and for me. We didn't know what the future would hold, but we knew that we were facing it together. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Together, we could handle anything. We had already come so far, and I knew we had the strength to go further. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but as long as we were a family, no matter how unconventional, nothing else mattered. We were ready to face whatever came our way, together. This is a captivating tale of love, change, and unexpected connections that unfold in a world where power, vulnerability, and healing collide. Follow the journey of a strong-willed maid who unexpectedly becomes part of a mafia boss's world, building a bond with his son and ultimately, with him. As the story progresses, we witness the deep transformation of a man who has spent his life hidden behind the walls of his empire, struggling to reconcile the cold business side of his life with the father he wishes to be. With a gentle romance growing amidst the chaos, we see that love is not always perfect, but it is real. In these romance stories, the focus isn't only on the attraction, but on the way vulnerability and personal growth can create a connection that transcends power. As the characters continue to evolve, their struggles bring them closer together, creating a family forged through understanding, patience, and love. Discover how true love in romance stories doesn't always happen the way we expect, but instead blossoms from the shared efforts to make life better for those we care about. In the end, we're left with the powerful reminder that sometimes the best romance stories are the ones where both individuals grow and change together, learning what it truly means to love and be loved. These romance stories prove that love, when nurtured through trust and change, can conquer the darkest of pasts and create something beautiful out of uncertainty.